Welcome to week 33 of Misha Dianne Watch Santa Barbara.
Hello.
We have, not recently, over a week ago, watched episode 158 of Santa Barbara, originally aired Monday, March 11th, 1985. Lakin tells Ted that his mother is posing as Contessa Armonti and that she's living at the Capwell Hotel. And also that Eden and Mason know that she's alive. Ted goes to the presidential suite and tells the maid it's okay that he's in there because his dad owns the place, and he searches around and finds the Contessa's photo album.
Mm-hmm.
Ted goes back to the Capwell house and tells Mason that he knows Sophia's alive, and Mason says that he's lucky to have his mother back since Cece ran off Pamela. Ted decides, rather than calling on the phone, he decides to go back to the Capwell Hotel and wait for the Contessa. Mason says, "The wedding starts in less than an hour. You don't want to miss the fun." So, he's clearly got something planned for Cece and or Gina. Now, Cece overhears Mason on the phone with Lionel, reminding him that if he gives him the Chinese puzzle box, he'll cancel the wedding, or he'll have it stopped somehow. Cece hangs up the phone and then complains again that Mason just walked into Gina's room while she was changing clothes, and Mason says, "Oh, she's very streamlined," to which Cece tells Mason to put up his fists. He wants to fight him, and Mason says he's got something better in mind, manages to get out of that conversation. Gina shows up, and Mason apologizes to Gina, and then he puts her on the spot about why she wants Mason at the wedding. She says, "Oh, well, I just saw that you two have been fighting, and I thought having you at the wedding, could help you patch things up."
Mm-hmm.
And Mason congratulates her on her quick thinking. And then says that he was planning to ask for his inheritance back. Cece says that he doesn't see any admirable qualities in him, and Mason says, "Well, that would be your fault."
Mm-hmm.
Cece says that Brandon has better qualities, and then Mason starts talking to Gina about how Cece's been planning this for a long time. And of course, Cece doesn't want Gina to find out that he'd already put Brandon in the will long before he'd asked Gina to marry him, so he sends Gina away so that Mason can't keep hinting about Brandon.
Mm-hmm.
And then Mason says, "A man your age has to watch his blood pressure."
Mm-hmm.
This is the first or maybe second time Mason's taunted Cece about his health and his age, and I remember a long string of these coming up, maybe for the next few months or maybe years. I remember him at some point saying, "Didn't your dad die at the same age that you are now? Wasn't it something that's hereditary?" So I think we've got a few of those coming up that'll be kind of fun. Cece pushes Mason out the door, but Brandon comes along right on time and asks if Mason is coming to the wedding. Cece said, "Oh, he's very busy." And Mason says, "I've cleared my schedule just so I can attend the wedding." And so he basically gets Brandon to invite him back to the wedding. Cece tells him that if he ruins the wedding, he'll ruin Mason. And he brings up some guy that previously Cece had ruined the career of as an example. Mason makes a phone call to an old friend and asks if he can be a partner in his law firm. And the guy says yes. So I think Mason has a backup plan for if everything goes well today.
Yeah.
Kelly finds her doll in storage, and it's broken. And then she gets upset when she has a flashback and remembers dropping and breaking it when she was younger.
Yeah. And she seems to be very focused on just looking for this doll. She's not really very aware of anything else that's going on. She's not really very interested in the wedding.
She brings the doll downstairs and keeps it in the box. I think when Cruz or Kelly asks her about it, She says it's just some stuff for Ted, maybe. But she doesn't let anyone see what's in the box. But I think she's planning to bring it to her meeting with Marcello later.
Yeah. And that makes me wonder if, for some reason, Marcello has hypnotized her to focus on this doll. And it makes me suspicious of, just how much involvement Marcello has actually had behind the scenes in Kelly's life. Could he have been on the scenes earlier in this story before we even met him, and maybe had something that had some sort of memory implanted that it concerned the doll? It definitely makes Marcello seem like perhaps a person who's maybe had a very long plan in mind, if he has sinister intent.
Well, I think we'll probably find out fairly soon. Gina tells Brandon that they're both going to change their last name to Capwell. Brandon wonders what Daddy would think about that, but Gina says she thinks he would be thrilled by it.
Yeah, Brandon actually doesn't seem that stoked by it.
But he doesn't seem super upset by it either.
No, he's just sort of puzzled by it, really.
Now, Cruz and Eden are looking at plans. Now, when we went on that Santa Barbara cruise, you may have overheard someone use the phrase, "at the Orient Express," and wondered, why would someone say "at the Orient Express" rather than "on the Orient Express"? Well, Eden's decided that her new restaurant will be called the Orient Express. And Cruz says, "I think I'm being railroaded."
So my question is, and I can't remember whether it was ever mentioned in this episode, but where she's thinking of having this restaurant.
She says it's going to be on top of the Capwell Hotel. So even though Cece had specifically told her that he didn't want her in charge of the restaurant on top of the Capwell Hotel, this is the location she's picked out. And I think she's trying to get Cruz to rent the space from Cece surreptitiously without mentioning that Eden's involved.
Okay.
But Cruz is not on board with lying to Cece.
And I tend to think, perhaps, thinking in the long run, that it would be better for Eden if she actually owned her hotel rather than rented out the space. Because that gives CC actually quite a bit of control over the venture. If she's renting, even if it's serendipitous. No. Even if it's...
Serenading?
No.
Sarin gas?
No. Even if it's through Cruz, it's
surreptitiously?
Still, yes, thank you. It's actually giving CC potentially a lot of control over the situation.
That's true. It's the sort of thing he might decide to take it over from her.
Yeah, he could take it away from her really easily.
Eden tells Cruz that her endgame is that she wants to run Capwell Enterprises someday. So, reminds me once again of Fallon Carrington on Dynasty.
Who ended up basically just remodeling a hotel. And didn't she? I don't think she ever owned that hotel, did she?
No, I think she just ran it.
And then she got kidnapped by aliens.
Hope that doesn't happen to Eden.
Yeah, hope not.
Ted walks in. I think he's looking for Eden, but she's in her bathrobe, so he realizes that Eden and Cruz are a couple. And then he tells Eden he knows Sophia's alive, and Eden tells him that Marcello warned them against telling Kelly at this fragile time. So, Lakin tells Augusta that Ted actually didn't know Sophia was alive, and she's very upset that she's the one that spilled it. But Augusta says, well, how could we know that Mason and Eden were keeping that from Ted? So,
fair point.
At school, she tells Jackie all about it, that Sophia is back alive, and another concern that the family has is that her father had once had an affair with Sophia. So Lakin thinks she needs to confront Sophia at this point. And Jackie says, Ted's got a half day of school off because he's going to a wedding, but you don't have time off school, so don't leave. So Lakin leaves and heads for the Capwell Hotel, and she runs into Ted on the top floor. He hasn't knocked on the door yet, but he sends Lakin away. He says, I want to talk to my mom alone first. So she leaves in a bit of a huff, and then Ted knocks on the door. That was the cliffhanger for that storyline.
I always feel, watching, I guess, the show for the last month or two, that it's kind of shifting its focus very much to its sort of two key families, which, it was on before, but that seems to be more the focus. And I guess that's part of the reason, maybe, why we don't see as much of Jade and we don't see as much of Danny. But I have to admit, for myself, I always feel a little bit regretful whenever I see Lakin having these little confiding sessions with their teacher, because I just wish that was with Jade instead, which would seem to me to be a little more appropriate.
Yeah, it's too bad that even in the school scenes, Jade should be in that class.
Yeah.
And we see some extras as fellow students, but it's never Jade. So.
Yeah. And it's just, it kind of creates a weird dynamic, I think, having the teacher be the main confidant of the two kids in the...
Yeah. It is odd. Introducing a new character when they had... between Danny and Jade, two other characters. In that
or
age
even
range.
Potentially the other kids in the classroom, if they wanted to maybe explore other relationships. When we saw the whole thing with Mr. Bottomley and that weird semester where they were pretending to be married to each other, there were other kids in the class.
Yeah, there were 8 in total. So.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't... recall any of those other people ever, getting moved to the forefront in the cast. So we may, the ones that we did see last week, I wasn't entirely sure if they're the same ones we saw last semester or not. No one really kind of stood out as being memorable. At the Capwell mansion, the ceremony begins. The priest has arrived, or the pastor, or the reverend, and Cece is not quite aware that Mason is actually still in the house, or never left, or returned. So the ceremony gets to the point where the reverend asks if there be anyone, and Mason says, "Excuse me, I can show just cause. I can tell you exactly why these two shouldn't be married." So I assume he's going to pull out the "he's already married to Sophia" card.
Now, I have to say for myself, I don't know about you, but I've actually never been to a wedding where that question has ever been asked.
Yeah, I don't recall it. And I think when we got married, we asked about it. And they said, we don't do that, or you can have it if you want, but people don't opt for it or something, so...
Yeah, I've been to a few very traditional weddings, and it certainly never came up. So.
Maybe it's a state of California thing, and most TV shows are made there. So.
Maybe it is, or maybe it's just something that used to be on the books, and it's just too tempting for writers to quite give up.
I guess in the days before you could do a record search at the courthouse easily, people would be just marrying people who might be from out of state or whatever. If there was anyone there who knew of any reason they couldn't be married, that was probably a word of mouth, personal witness statement that you would need. Just like when you vote and you can get someone to attest to your identity, if you have no documents. So I think Gina doesn't know what this is about, so she's going to assume it's about Hank, maybe, and maybe blurt something out that she needn't before Mason can say something, or... we don't know that the Contessa is actually in her suite. She might be there disguised as the gardener or something. She might actually be in the room, and we don't know it. She might be the priest in disguise.
One thing I was trying to work out is during one of Mason's little tussles with Cece in this episode, and he sort of threatens to reveal to Gina that, obviously Brandon's adopted, but maybe that Cece has greater interests in Brandon than perhaps she realizes.
Mm-hmm.
And I sort of wondered how threatening that actually would be to Gina.
Because that would actually cement her into the family even better.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a good point. A couple of times we've tried to guess what was going to happen next with some piece of information. I think when Lionel and Mason were bidding for that land, and we thought we knew how Mason's plan was going to work, and it actually didn't work quite out the way we thought it would, and it still worked out in Mason's favor. So
the other thing that occurred to me, and we'll see if it really comes into play very much in the future, but it occurred to me that Cece overhearing Mason negotiating with Lionel on the phone and bringing up this little Chinese puzzle box, that perhaps in other iterations of Cece and the way the character is created, like I could see the first Cece we saw, maybe seizing on that and thinking, oh, that's kind of an interesting thing. If Mason's interest in that puzzle box, maybe I should be too, and kind of tucking that away in the back of his mind as another card to play. I don't think this version of CC, I got the feeling that if he really picked up on that information, I don't think it meant much, and he was kind of stomping around, and but it just occurred to me that with certain characters, or with the way certain characters are portrayed, that kind of information could be a really important piece, or it could just fall by the wayside.
I think, as a viewer, I'm really hoping for Lionel to get one over on the Capwells. He's already lost that land. He did try that thing with the logbook, but I think it kind of just petered out when he went to jail. Now to have Mason take the Chinese puzzle box from him and potentially reveal that it was of great value. I'm kind of not hoping that Mason gets one over on Lionel in this case, because he hasn't had a good win yet against the Capwells.
Yeah, I would think that to keep the rivalry interesting, they do have to give Lionel a little win once in a while.
Because it's, there's also already the potential that Lionel will lose again if someone finds out all his paintings are fake. So he's kind of on unsteady ground. And then with Brick usurping his place in the family.
And we don't know Brick's whole story yet either. But he definitely is the one who has Minx's confidence in terms of the family finances and that. Which is a big piece of it.
I hope we see Minx again soon. All right, well, we'll be back after we watch episode 159 of Santa Barbara.
Bye-bye.
This week's spotlight is on Mark Arnold, who played Joe Perkins number 2 on Santa Barbara. Mark Arnold was born on May 23, 1957, in Broomall, Pennsylvania. He married Alina Florea in 2011 and was previously married to Annalisa Scott from 1999 to 2006. Before Santa Barbara, Arnold's screen credits included roles in Guiding Light, The Edge of Night, and Rituals, as well as the movie Endless Love. Beginning with episode 68, Arnold appeared in 50 episodes of Santa Barbara as Joe Perkins, a murder suspect presumed innocent due to a false confession, who subsequently married his high school sweetheart Kelly Capwell, but then was murdered by a serial killer. After Santa Barbara, Arnold appeared on One Life to Live, and in shows such as Wings, Boy Meets World, Las Vegas, Desperate Housewives, and in numerous short films and several features such as Teen Wolf and Blade Runner 2049.
Welcome back to week 33 of Misha and Dianne Watch Santa Barbara.
Hello.
Episode 159 of our show. And episode 159 of Santa Barbara. Originally aired Tuesday, March 12th, 1985. So we've gotten a bit behind due to some change in our work circumstance. So I don't think we're going to hit May 20th on May 20th, unless we somehow catch up 3 weeks between now and May. But we'll see how things go. So, tonight we watched this episode, and it picked up where we left off, with Mason stopping the wedding between Cece and Gina. He announces that Cece is still married to Sophia. Of course, at first Cece thinks it's a trick, so he goes to check on that with his lawyers. Mason tells Eden that she looks disappointed. It must be the actress genes in her. Kelly thinks there's a reason that Sophia was never declared dead, because she wasn't supposed to die. She says all of it's her fault. So Kelly's basically been a zombie for several days. So I'm thinking it's Marcello's treatments.
Yeah, she seems very unwell and in her own little world, and it seems like, we saw this sort of investigative side of her when she and Joe were trying to figure out who Dominic was and who actually perhaps murdered Channing. And she still seems to have a bit of that, but she's kind of spinning it in all sorts of different directions. So yes, I think definitely her treatment with Marcello is not making her healthier. It seems like she's just very open to all sorts of suggestions.
I'm wondering if somehow she did see Sophia after she supposedly died, and then suppressed that as a kid, and now it's coming forward.
Yes, perhaps.
This makes me think that CC will be the next to find out that Sophia's alive, but they'll all keep it from Kelly, and then she'll somehow remember it herself. That's what I'm thinking. Now, CC and Mason have a great episode together. They had some great scene before Cece stormed off. He comes back and tells Gina that they can clear this all up in one day and get married tomorrow. Mason suggests to Gina that she leave town before Cece finds out about Hank. I think Hank's still on his way to Santa Barbara very soon. So even though they changed the wedding date, he could get out early and show up before the next wedding. Or Sophia could show up. Eden overhears this. So Mason's not trying to hide it from her. He knows Eden's right there. And so then Eden, is wondering who Hank is. She calls Cruz and asks him to look into Gina's past. But he says, I don't want to get on the wrong side of Mr. C, so I'm not going to do that. Why don't you ask Gina herself? So Eden says to Gina, who is Hank? And Gina refuses to answer. Cece decides a good time to ruin Mason's life. So he calls the DA out of a meeting with the mayor and the police chief, and he comes running when he hears Cece's on the line, and Cece basically tells him to fire Mason. So he tells Cruz, take this letter over to Mason. Cece's ordered me to fire him. So this is the first time we've seen DA Tony Patterson, and seems to be under Cece's thumb.
Yeah, he's not a very impressive figure. I think we can see why Mason was allowed to run amok as much as he was in the past. The actual district attorney seems very sort of weak-willed. He doesn't even have the courage, I guess you would say, to fire Mason himself directly to his face. He kind of pawns it off on Cruz, who, as Cruz reminds us in this episode, is not a high-ranking official or anything like that. And, when Cruz kind of questions him on this, he just basically says, well, whatever C.C. Capwell wants, he'll get. So he's not even trying to pretend that he's really there for any honorable reasons or, to actually try and do some good in Santa Barbara. It's all about serving C.C. Capwell.
I guess C.C. must have had something to do with getting him elected in the first place.
Yes, probably.
So, Cruz and Mason are together when in Mason's office, actually. So I'm not sure. Cruz actually got the call from Eden in Mason's office, so it's interesting that I guess maybe they routed the call to him.
And I have to say that Mason made extremely good time getting to his office. It makes me think his office is fairly near to the Capwell house.
So Walter Fleming shows up to say he rescinds his offer for Mason to be a partner because all of his wealthy clients called him that morning to say they would leave the firm if they hired Mason. So Mason said, well, they're no doubt friends of C.C. Capwell's. Then we had seen C.C. giving a call to someone, telling him to ruin Mason's credit, and next thing you know, the bank calls to say his account's been frozen and all of his credit cards are cancelled. And then Mason also gets evicted from his home. I can't quite remember if he's still living in the Capwell Hotel or not.
He mentions the Capwell Hotel later in the episode.
So, of course, he's been drinking the whole time. He'd been packing, not because he thought he was going to be fired, but because he was planning to take that job with Walter Fleming. So, at the Capwell Hotel, Sophia opens the door to see Ted and Lakin arguing, and they both see her. And so Ted tells Lakin to go away. He wants to see his mom alone, and they have a reunion. And Ted's overall happy to see her. She reveals to him that she was the bag lady, and that was part of her plan to confirm that she really should come back by secretly talking to all of her children first. And they talk about Channing, and both have happy memories about him. And Sophia reveals something interesting. She says that Cece was always trying to push Channing into sports and athletics, whereas he was really more interested in the arts. So this is the first indication we've had that this golden relationship between Cece and Channing that Cece's telling us may not have been quite two-directional. I mean, Channing may have resented being pushed into all these plans that Cece had for him.
Well, we've certainly in flashbacks already seen that other people's memories of Channing don't really match up with how he really was. And from what we've seen, he doesn't seem to have been a very happy person. So it could well be that there was actually a lot more tension there than anyone has let on so far.
It may well be that Cece wasn't aware of it, though, and that his recollections are just what Channing let him see. So he may have some surprises when the real Channing is revealed to him. Ted mentions to Sophia that Cece is marrying Gina, basically as they speak. Obviously not aware that the wedding was stopped. And when he leaves Lakin, gets her turn with Sophia, and it's not quite as happy. A reunion, she basically says to stay away from her father. Doesn't really hear Sophia's protestations that she has no interest in Lionel at all. Where Ted goes to the Capwell mansion, and Eden tells him not to tell Cece about Sophia. She also tells Ted that she doesn't believe Sophia's story about the amnesia and being in an institution, which, of course, Ted believes 100%. So they're at odds over that.
We're starting to see some really interesting dynamics in the Capwell family. So Eden is very much, I guess, a daddy's girl in a way, and she's all about protecting her dad. Whereas Ted is immediately on his mom's side, and the only reason he doesn't want to tell Cece is because his mom doesn't want anyone to know right now. So we're seeing some interesting dynamics. We've already seen that Mason, of course, had his own issues with Sophia when she was his stepmom. It'll be really interesting to see when Kelly does finally find out where she sits in relation to her mom.
And it's interesting, will Cece want to get back with Sophia right away? Obviously, he needs access to Brandon, so that will be, we'll see how quickly that happens. They may actually get married tomorrow, for all we know. Cruz arrives to warn them all that Mason is angry and drunk and on his way home. Mason returns and demands to know where Cece is. Tells them all, that he's lost his job and his bank accounts and his home. And they say, don't go up there. Cece will kill you with his bare hands. So Mason grabs a sword and says, well, then I better be armed. And he runs upstairs, bursts into, I don't know if it's Gina's room or Cece's room. And they're in bed. And he puts the sword right to Cece's face and as a defensive measure, I think. And basically tells Gina that he's not interested in her at all, that Cece's just interested in Brandon. But before he can reveal the reason, Cruz and Ted manage to get the sword away from him, drag him out, and he yells as he's being dragged out to Cece, I'm going to bring you to your knees. So I would really kind of like to see that, actually. I would like to see how Mason comes back from this complete destruction by Cece.
Yeah, it's we saw some kind of, I thought, interesting things in this episode. First of all, I was really impressed with how sympathetic Cruz has been towards Mason in this episode. He didn't like having to be the one to fire Mason. He immediately says to Mason, look, maybe there's something you can do. When Mason loses all of his financial stability and everything, he says, look, that's not right.
He says, I have a friend in San Francisco. Yeah. You could probably get a job there at the DA's office.
Yeah. So it'll be really interesting to see kind of what role Cruz plays in this rivalry going forward. And one of the things that also happened in this episode is Cruz suddenly takes a phone call from, I guess, the office or something. So I think it'll be interesting to see if that actually turns into something, or if that's just a reason why Cruz wouldn't be, following Mason up the stairs to the last bit of the scene.
Because Eden had called Cruz to the phone after Mason had grabbed the sword, and I guess Ted alone couldn't stop him from going up the stairs. Maybe that was the reason, or maybe there actually is some third thing happening in town that will suddenly come to the forefront. Maybe it has to do with Hank Jennings. I don't know.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking.
I don't know if Cruz is involved in that storyline. So.
And also, I was thinking it was kind of interesting that in this episode we're really seeing, we've kind of, when we've talked about the show in the past, we've kind of commented on how sometimes Mason is a little slower than Cruz to getting information, for example, about Peter and, various other things. But we're really seeing in this episode how much information Mason has really gotten. And he's got information on his dad and his dad's true motives for marrying Gina, and he's got information on Gina. And that's really coming together in this episode. And also we're seeing a little bit more, perhaps, of Gina's true colors in this. We saw her slap Eden in this episode. Or slap Mason and
She slaps Mason.
She slaps Mason, and basically tells Eden to take a hike. So we're seeing a much more steely Gina than we've seen before. And we're maybe seeing a little bit more of the Gina who did hang out with Hank and whatever nefarious things he was doing.
Yeah, I think with her sister gone, there's not really anything anchoring Gina down anymore. I mean, she could do anything at this point, I think.
Yeah.
That is it for this episode. So we will see how Mason takes his revenge on Cece. I think one of the things he'll try and do is take Channing down in Cece's eyes. I seem to remember a couple of times when he tries to needle Cece over Channing. But we'll see if there's anything that he can actually do, against all these things Cece's done to him.
Well, I think too in that last scene in the bedroom, he has managed to sow some seeds of doubt between Gina and Cece. You know, Cece knows there's something with some guy named Hank now that Gina doesn't want him to know about. And Gina knows that there might be an ulterior motive on Cece's part for marrying her that involves Brandon. So he has, I think, managed to just bring a little bit of suspicion to that relationship that maybe wasn't there before.
I don't know if he can leverage that into getting his job back or anything.
No, we'll
I don't
see.
think it's an election year, otherwise his only option might be to run against Tony Patterson himself and try to get that job on his own, but I think CC would probably run a nasty campaign against him if that happened.
Yeah, but he might have other ideas too. I mean, eventually when he focuses on his own life again, because he never did really, I don't know how dedicated he really was to being an assistant district attorney. I think he liked the power it gave him to basically control the police department, but, you know, one of his earliest episodes, he was saying he didn't want to pursue that all the way to district attorney and to the governor's office, so who knows?
But maybe that's just because that's what Cece wanted for him. Well, we will see what happens in episode 160 when we return.
Bye-bye.
See you. Welcome back to Misha Dianne Watch Santa Barbara.
Hello.
We've watched episode 160 of Santa Barbara, originally aired Wednesday, March 13th, 1985. And last night, or the night before, we saw Margarita Cordova on Adam 12. Early episode in season 2, so that was cool to see her.
Yeah, she was very young and wearing a very short dress, as they did in 1969, I guess.
I think so. Also, some sad news. John Callahan passed away at the age of 66. He's known to Santa Barbara viewers as Robert Barr's right-hand man. And, of course, Robert Barr was played by Roscoe Bourne, who passed away about 2 weeks ago. So, and just as Roscoe Bourne married his co-star Roberta Bizot from Santa Barbara, John Callahan married his co-star Ava LaRue from, I think they were on General Hospital or All My Children, one of those shows, I forget. He's been on several. So. And that is it for the news. Back to the main feature. Amy Perkins and Brick Wallace are filling out a job application, and there's lots of questions about marital status. She's worried that they won't hire a single girl as an office temp. So, Brick says he'll pretend to be her husband and says to put down chauffeur, and he ends up going to get some rings his mum gave him when he was young, and gives her a ring that she can put on when she goes for the interview, and says he'll even drop her off to make it look good.
I was actually relieved when Amy was reading aloud some of these questions, and she and Brick talked about how a lot of them were actually illegal. So I was actually kind of relieved that that was recognized even at that time.
And meanwhile, across town, in Dr. Renfro's office, a mysterious man is reading Amy's file. Now, this file's kind of hilarious, because it's got Amy Perkins scrawled like almost in crayon on the cover. It's a very unprofessional-looking file. And the folders just as thin as the ones Warren Lockridge found in the storage room of the pawn shop all those weeks ago, and the flimsy file folders that didn't appear to have anything in them at the hospital in Alaska that Joe searched. It's probably the same folder. But anyway, Dr. Renfro is now being played by the actor that I remember as Dr. Renfro. After only one appearance, the previous guy got replaced. Anyway, the mystery man wants to know more about this Brick Wallace. So Dr. Renfro calls Amy and wants her to come in immediately. And he claims it's just for a checkup. So, have we seen this mystery man before? I can't remember. We knew there was something suspicious. Maybe we saw Dr. Renfro call some mysterious person.
we knew that Dr. Renfro was conspiring with someone, but we still don't know the details. And I mean, my suspicion was that it had something to do with Jeff, but because he seems to be the only one who would really have any kind of interest in Amy at all. But it just seems odd to me because, most men who don't want to raise a baby kind of, I think, take off at the earliest opportunity. So I'm not quite sure.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's interesting that it almost seems like the mysterious man didn't know about Brick until today.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so maybe it's someone else. Maybe it's something completely different.
Something totally different, which I've expected that Amy would have, I guess, a weird storyline. The most bland character has something that's actually intriguing happening.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Or maybe it has something to do with something other than Amy. I mean, maybe she's just somehow unknowingly involved in something else. I mean, who knows?
Mm-hmm.
We'll find out.
Yeah. Well, I do remember Dr. Renfro, and I guess that's probably because, as the end of March approached, I would have wrapped up my college courses and had a few weeks off to study for exams in April. So probably as we get towards April, we'll have seen some of these episodes, and that's why I remember this actor who played Dr. Renfro. But plot-wise, I don't really have any memory of this. So Gina asks Cece how many children he wants to have with her. And I think she's quite happy when he says he wouldn't mind having kids with her. Mm-hmm. She was kind of worried he'd say he'd finished, but he goes, I think this... Starting with Brandon, this will be a new branch of the Capwell family that we can start. So Gina's pretty happy about that. They talk about getting married tomorrow, so I guess this is the day after the failed wedding, the day he's going to have all the paperwork taken care of, to have Sophia declared dead, and then tomorrow they're going to get married. They hear Kelly scream. Kelly's had a dream about breaking her doll again, and this time Kelly actually looks in the box and sees that her doll is broken, just as in her dream, and I guess that freaks her out. Kelly is basically a zombie in this whole episode, and saying weird things. So the family decides to move up her appointment with Marcello to 11 o'clock. And Gina then wonders what Mason meant about Cece's interest in Brandon, and Cece covers by saying, I promised Brandon's mother that I would find him a good home. The father had died, and she was too young to take care of a child, so I really just want to follow through on that promise. So I think that Gina bought that. It's quite believable. Of course, Mason could always tell her the truth. Could hold that over Cece's head to try and get some money back, because Mason is really in trouble now. He wakes up in a motel to find that the prostitute he hired the night before had taken all his money and his watch. Now, we saw her actually just take the $75 originally that she was owed, but then when she realized he was Mason Capwell and had arrested a lot of her friends, she decided that as a hypocritical assistant DA, he owed her entire profession a little more, and ended up taking the rest of his money and his watch.
So we're seeing a bit of karma coming back on Mason.
He calls around to some friends trying to borrow some money once the innkeeper demands, his $29.75 payment, and then bumps it up to $30 when Mason asks to see a newspaper and sees he is the front page headline, disgraced district attorney. So obviously Cece's made sure that appears on the front page. So he ends up having to leave his coat for collateral, and meets Kelly at her place, or what I call Sally's place, and Kelly gives him a wooden box, and he opens it up, and it's full of money, and she said, yeah, Joe and I were saving for something. She doesn't even remember what it is. So Mason's concerned how zombie-like she is, and saying kind of off-the-wall things. Kelly does ask him about what he remembers from when Sophia died. And he says that Rosa had taken him to the dentist that day, and he didn't actually attend the funeral. So it's interesting. Then Mason, I don't know how he thinks he's going to pay for a drink, but he goes to the State Street Saloon, and the bartender's already got his drink ready for him.
He's got a little bit of change. I think he's managed to come up with just enough change for his
That's right.
drink.
He does come up with some change. And then he recalls that Lionel owes him a puzzle box. So I'm wondering if maybe if the emerald is in there, that will be Mason's way of clawing its way back to at least not being a man without a coat. And who does he run into but Hank, who's fresh out of jail.
And looking a little different, we think.
I don't think it's the same Hank. Yeah. I'll have to look that up. So he at first wants to steer clear of Mason, but his friend has the newspaper and says, "Oh no, he's not the DA anymore, or assistant DA anymore. He's nothing." So Hank starts beating Mason, probably more than he needs to, trying to find out where Gina is, but Mason doesn't reveal Gina's whereabouts, and Mason ends up getting knocked out. And then Hank's friend asks what Gina's last name is. He says it's DeMott. He says, "Oh, I know where she is. It's in the paper, too. She's marrying C.C. Capwell." Mm-hmm. So Hank calls Gina at the Capwell mansion. And Gina manages to cover by making it sound like it's a reporter asking about the wedding. And so even though he says, "Oh, I missed you, I want to see you," she says she doesn't want to see him, but makes it sound to Cece like she's talking to a reporter. But I don't think that's going to hold Hank off for very long.
Now, was Gina in her wedding outfit again? It looked like they were dressed up again.
I don't recall now what she was wearing in that last scene.
I think she was.
Oh, that's one thing I thought about last night. This whole episode was shot very weird. Every scene was very tight. For example, all of the Capwell mansion scenes, they were all shot not just in the atrium, but really close to the front door. The table that Cece sits at one point, we don't even see the table. If it's the wicker table that's normally near the fountain, it's been moved way towards the front door, and we see just such a small part of the set. The front door, the lower part of the stairs, and the chair in the foreground that we don't even see if someone's sitting in it. And everything took place really close in that tight space. Now, the State Street Saloon, the camera was just basically over the bartender's left shoulder. We never saw anything else. And I don't know if the director just that was the style. Like, I don't know if this is a different director than we've had before. There was almost the most movement we saw was at the Perkins house, because we saw the couch, and then we saw them coming and going to the door briefly, but we never saw that whole left side of the Perkins house where the baby's room is. So when we saw Sophia on the phone with Marcello, which is a scene we haven't talked about yet, it's a very close shot of her on the phone, probably in her room. Marcello's office really is the only one that we see, in the front room of Marcello's office, and then Mason's hotel. And I don't know if they needed to build an extra set that they didn't have space for. I mean, I guess maybe the Mason hotel room, maybe they used part of, built it inside the normal atrium or something and squeezed everything together.
Maybe.
It's very odd that every scene was so tightly shot that day. Or there was a strike of the people who moved the cameras, and they had to be positioned at the start of the shot and not moved. That's the only other thing that I could think of that could happen that would cause something weird like that. So, speaking of Marcello's office, Marcello notices there's no wedding announcement in the paper, and Sophia asks why he doesn't like Cece. But he manages to blow that off by saying it's time for Kelly's appointment. Kelly arrives for her session and is put under her immediately. She remembers her mother wanting to take her to the zoo on the day she died, and that she wanted to stay and play with her friend Betsy, who we realize is the doll, but Marcello actually doesn't realize till later. He calls Sophia to try and come down and tell him who Betsy is, but she doesn't know, so I think he says he thinks it's the doll. But in the flashback, we see a man grabbing Sophia's arm.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know if this is really a memory of Lionel grabbing Sophia, or if Kelly has put this whole thing in her mind. Because the fact is, because she didn't go to the zoo with her mother, she ended up going out on the boat with Lionel.
Mm-hmm.
So she comes out of it saying, "Oh, I killed Betsy. I killed Betsy." So obviously this is a parallel to Sophia dying on that day, and maybe the broken doll is really an analogy of her thinking that she killed Sophia because she didn't want to go to the zoo that day.
Now, I had been sort of playing with the idea that perhaps Marcello, being an accomplished hypnotist, had maybe found this memory of Kelly's and working with her, and somehow had her fixate on the doll, and was using that image to maybe manipulate her a little bit if he does have some sinister aims. But he does seem genuinely surprised by the idea of Betsy, and it does seem in this episode that he doesn't really know who that is. So, so I am thinking at this point that the doll is a fixation that Kelly has come up with on her own, and is really a symptom of her deeper problems.
Yeah, hopefully Marcello can work through that, and we can see if the flashbacks or dreams she's having are really all flashbacks, or if she's mixing some fantasy in with reality there.
Mm-hmm. I'll be interested to see where Mason ends up, if perhaps he ends up staying at Kelly's apartment since he has nowhere else to go.
It seems like that's what I would do. I would ask my sister if I could stay on her couch if I had nothing.
Yeah.
So maybe Peter's apartment is still empty. You
Yeah,
can sneak in
maybe.
there for the but we know the rent wasn't paid up, so
Yeah.
it's probably been. Well, it's still got police tape. Maybe Mason can sneak in there for a month.
And it'll just be interesting to see how Mason does manage to pull himself up, if it is through the puzzle box, perhaps with a priceless emerald in it, or if it's some other way. And I'm really looking forward, to seeing what that means for his relationship with Cece.
It'd be nice if some of these seemingly dropped storylines from before Christmas, they're not only wrapped up, but paid off for one of the characters in some way. So hopefully that emerald is in there. That would wrap up the puzzle box and the emerald storyline at the same time.
And I've pretty much almost lost hope of seeing much of Jade or Danny again, but it would be nice to have some little thing with them, I guess, to kind of wrap them up, or explain that they've gone off on a trip or something like that.
Yeah, I mean, they almost, like when the last time we saw them, they were in that snowstorm.
That was the last kind of storyline, and then we saw Jade at the wedding, I guess.
So we don't know if they actually
and when Joe died
did end up together at all after that snowstorm night. It's considering a few high school age kids they have on the show. It's weird that we're seeing 2 out of the 4 only.
Yeah, and that the 2 are spending their time hanging with their teacher, which I don't think really ever happens in real life.
Yeah. Well, I guess they'll interleave that story in with the A stories, I guess, the Marcello story, and the Sophia story, and the Gina/Brandon story, and the Mason story. I guess are all higher priority, although Amy, who knows, this Amy thing is in an upward trajectory, so we'll see where that goes. Maybe I will remember something if enough more hints are dropped. Just remember Dr. Renfro being a bad guy. That's all I remember, really. So, all right, that is it for episode 160 of our podcast. But because we're stringing a week's worth together in every release, you can just wait 5 seconds and watch episode 161 of Misha Dianne Watch Santa Barbara. See you.
Bye-bye.
welcome back to Misha and Dianne Watch Santa Barbara.
Hello.
We have finished episode 161, which originally aired on Thursday, March 14th, 1985. So Kelly and Marcello are having their session, and Kelly tells Marcello that she didn't really love Sophia because she caused her death, and that causes her to run out. She runs right past Sophia. Sophia gets a phone call from Mason asking for her help after he's been beaten up at the bar, and Frank the bartender ends up bringing Mason to Sophia's suite. He tells Sophia the wedding didn't happen, and then he asks her to stop the wedding. So I think now he must have thought through that his plans will work better with Sophia revealing herself to Cece, because previously he wanted her to leave town, but I guess that's before he was kicked out of his job and everything.
It was kind of nice to see he and Sophia kind of working together, and I'm hoping they'll have a better relationship going forward. He also revealed to Sophia that she had a grandson.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, that's right. He mentions their grandson, but then doesn't get a chance to go into further detail. Mason says Sophia says she would rather speak to Kelly first before revealing herself to CC. Mason says she's only got an hour, but then Marcello comes in and says Kelly's run off, and they think she might be in the last place that she ever saw Sophia, which was the gazebo. And so Sophia says she's got to run off and help Kelly, and Mason agrees. So obviously he feels Kelly's more important than ruining Cece's wedding. But then he gets Sarah to come over. We last saw her in episode 22, and we were trying to decide if she was his secretary, because you thought he had a secretary, Vicky, at some point. So.
I for some reason that name is in my head, but maybe not.
He gets Sarah to call the Capwell mansion, pretending to be the judge's secretary, and bumping the wedding from 2 till 4. And then he calls the judge, pretending to be getting Sarah to pretend to be CC's secretary, and also asks the judge to push the wedding off from 2 to 4. And thus he's given Sophia a couple of extra hours. Then he calls Gina to warn her about Hank. Of course, she's already encountered a phone call from Hank.
Yeah.
So she first thought that Mason had told Hank where she was, but he said, no, I didn't do that. And Gina's all dressed up for her wedding, and Hank arrives at the Capwell mansion while Cece's down at the stables. Cece's actually not in this episode, but he's talked about a lot, and he's just left the room several times. And Hank taunts Gina about their past relationship and how she keeps marrying old rich men, hoping they'll die soon, and that he's going to be wanting regular payments to keep from telling Cece about her past. He's going to give her a week to get her hands on the first batch of money.
She also confronts him about Summer and him raping Summer all those years ago, and he's completely unrepentant about that too. So that gives us another sense of the man.
Yep. He's and now with this blackmail thing, it suddenly puts in my mind that he's going to be sticking around for weeks and be a thorn in Gina's side, and obviously Mason will be aware of it, and I don't know if Mason can just press charges for assault, or if Cece's ban on anyone having anything to do with Mason extends to that. Sarah said she was risking her job just to help him. Lionel tells Augusta that he struck a deal with Mason to stop the wedding. He goes to have the puzzle box appraised. Now he goes to visit David Chang, played by James Hong, who I got to meet at Comic-Con one year. It's very exciting to see James Hong. And he asks if he can open the puzzle box. And David Chang reveals it's similar to one his grandfather had that exploded when he tried to open it and killed him.
So apparently these can be actually used as weapons.
So if the box is booby-trapped, he says it might take him 6 weeks to open it safely. And of course, Lionel only has an hour or two because Mason wants that puzzle box. So then he asks if David Chang could make him a fake one. He said, 5,000 for the box and 5,000 for my silence. So he says, fine, I'll call and let you know what you should put in it. So he's obviously going to want to hide something inside it that Mason will believe is the treasure that was worthy of putting in a Chinese puzzle box, but that would give Lionel a chance to find the real treasure. So that's an interesting twist to what we thought. I do hope, I do hope it's the emerald, and I do hope Lionel ends up with it.
It'll be interesting to, see what happens with that, like how they exchange it, and kind of, I'm going to be really interested to see if and how Mason does detect that it's a counterfeit, and if that boomerangs back on Lionel and all the many counterfeits that he's involved with.
Amy is joking with Brick about his great prowess, advising the Lockridges on their finances.
Yes.
And he says, oh, maybe you can advise Augusta to sell all of her dresses, and then I'll buy them and wear them when I can fit into them again, even though they're last year's.
Yeah.
Dr. Renfro calls and wants to interview Amy, and or actually they were probably having that earlier conversation in Dr. Renfro's office, because he had already called them last episode. So Dr. Renfro interviews Amy alone and voices his concerns about Brick. And she's like, oh no, everything's fine. He's living in our house, so I can vet him. So then he has to interview Brick privately, and Brick comes in, and he tells Brick that Amy will never have time for him with the baby. So he's trying to break them up from both directions. And then later, after Brick leaves, he makes a phone call. Dr. Renfro probably calling the mysterious person we saw last time. It says, he's moving into the Perkins house. They're much closer than we imagined.
So I think I asked you after this episode what you thought was going on here, because you actually admitted to me that you're starting to find this Amy centered plot kind of interesting, and I asked you where you thought it was going.
Oh, hang on, this might be one of our regular callers. Hi, you're on the air.
I'm on the air. Yes, which episode of Santa Barbara are you watching today?
We watched 161 last night, and it got too dark, so we didn't do the podcast till today.
Oh, okay.
Now, if I remember you, caller, Mr. F, I think we'll call you. You had previously called about an actress that was on Beverly Hills 90210 that you had thought was on Santa Barbara, and after researching it, we discovered that the actress was actually on Sunset Beach.
And Sunset Beach was also set in Santa Barbara, was it not?
I don't know, because a true Santa Barbara fan would never watch Sunset Beach because it replaced our beloved show. So
no,
you'll probably get a lot of death threats now from fans.
The mistake happened to be that she appeared on Sunset Beach, and there may have been a period where it was set in Santa Barbara, which probably upset Santa Barbara fans.
Could be. Yes, I know there was a lot of talk about boycotting NBC when Santa Barbara got canceled, and then when Another World got canceled, everyone said, I'm not watching Passions, and I'm going to boycott NBC, and somehow the ratings are down to 200,000 now for Days of Our Lives. So I think all these boycotts have led to no one watching television anymore.
Well, if they're watching, they'd be watching it on the Soap Opera channel now.
Is that still around? I think that was owned by ABC. They might only be showing ABC soaps.
It might only be on the net, though. I think, on the web.
They might have gone out of business.
Or it's gone out of business, one or the other.
All right. Bye-bye. Oh, well, our most beloved caller.
So what is your theory about what's happening with
Amy?
Yeah.
Well, I think they want her baby.
Mm-hmm.
And I think they're worried maybe they're worried that Brick will be in the delivery room, because maybe they're going to plan to tell her that her baby's died after it's born, and they don't want any witnesses.
Yeah, I was actually thinking the same thing. It was kind of what I call a Days of Our Lives special, with the stealing of a baby and telling the parents that it's dead. And I was wondering if maybe, I still think there's a possibility Jeff could be behind it, and maybe he's got, for lack of a better term, a seller or a buyer for the baby, and is expecting to make a huge amount of money with the adoption.
Yeah, I think I'm leaning more towards your previous thing, that it seems like too many people involved to be a Jeff scheme, because it's like the guy came from Boston.
The other thought I had was, that we heard, I think it was probably the last time we really saw Jeff, him saying that he was infertile, basically.
Mm-hmm.
And so that was the other thought I had, was if we take that at face value, if that's actually real, then it could be a much bigger, more complicated, more amazing kind of plot line, that Amy's somehow gotten pregnant.
Well, yeah. I mean, how did she get pregnant if it wasn't Jeff?
Well, if she was somehow knocked out and inseminated or something like that.
By a Dr. Rolf type.
Yeah.
Dr. Renfrew.
Yeah.
Yeah, that could be.
Which also could be a Dates of Our Lives storyline, too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's weird. It's like, is it just some sort of baby selling scheme where they randomly impregnate people and take their babies?
Yeah,
That's
or if
weird.
someone has commissioned this, and
And
who would
picked-
have the money
They picked
to
Amy
do that.
Perkins of all the people in the world to have a baby for them.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but I
It's
do.
like she lived in San Francisco and now she's in Santa Barbara, so it'd be
Yeah, and she's
quite
not
a
really.
far-reaching thing if Dr. Renfrew was from Santa Barbara.
Mm-hmm.
The other guy's from Boston. So, yeah, it'll be interesting to see how that coalesces.
But I do think the stealing of the baby is some element of it.
I did have a thought that it might be related to a plot line I sort of started to remember, but I thought that plot line was related to a different character, so so maybe I'm mixing two different things together in my head.
Yeah.
So I'll keep that to myself. I mean, I assume we'll find out eventually.
Mm-hmm.
Unless they drop the storyline.
Yeah, and
That would be hilarious.
Amy just sort of ends up.
Just had a baby and they never talk about it again.
Yeah, and Amy just goes off on her way. Or, as you say, it'd be like all those old episodes of Macmillan and Wife where she's perpetually pregnant, but they never seem to have any kids.
Yeah. No, I think we will. I think we will find out. It's just. This is probably the next month. Is probably when I would have seen Santa Barbara.
Yeah.
So there's probably some things maybe that will come to me when I see them. So Marcello drops Sophie off at the Lockridge house. What? So she has heard that Augusta's out of the house from someone. I forget how.
Yeah.
And as she comes in, Augusta's actually just come home
Yeah.
from shopping. So she runs into Augusta, and then she says, "Oh, I just came to tell you I don't care about Lionel at all." And Augusta's like, "You should be stopping that wedding that's happening right now if you want to prove that." And she said, "Oh, I got to make a phone call first." And then Augusta actually takes a phone call, and Sophia sneaks down into the basement, and we're like, "What's going on?" And in the back of my head, I thought, "Oh, I think I know where she's going." And she ends up going into the secret tunnels beneath the Capwell and Lockridge properties that I remember enjoying as a kid. So this is the start of the tunnels storylines. So she takes the tunnel to the gazebo where Kelly is. So that is interesting. And you were saying you thought maybe the tunnels had been used in the past.
I thought maybe there's some history, maybe with even previous generations of Lockridges and Capwells in these tunnels.
Wondering if it goes back to some kind of bootlegging days
Maybe.
or something.
Yeah.
I don't recall the origins.
My favorite part of this whole scene actually was at the very beginning when we first see Augusta come home and she's got her shopping bags and she opens them up and she unwraps a little, what looks like a negligee or something she bought, and she decides she doesn't like it and says, Augusta, what's wrong with you? And I think so many people can relate to that they get home with something they're so pleased with and realize it looks a little different when it's outside of the store. And then she uncovers a couple bottles of wine, which she's much happier with, and goes off to put them away.
Yeah, she goes through the same door that Sophia goes through, so I'm wondering if that's the door to the wine cellar.
That's what I'm thinking.
And that the tunnels maybe are behind a wine rack or something. You know, is it the same wine cellar we saw Elizabeth Peel in all those months ago?
Thinking.
So it'd be interesting if we see that same wine cellar set in the future, and if one of those wine racks, opens up to have a tunnel behind it. So and they didn't really show the tunnel opening on the gazebo side because it's I'm not really sure where it would be. But I do remember a few months ago, someone stopping the moving of the gazebo. And I'm wondering if that person knows that would have revealed the tunnel.
Maybe there's a little
and I can't remember who it was. Santana wanted to move it.
Yeah.
But someone else said, no, don't move it. So it'd be interesting to see. So, the tunnel was roomier than I remember.
At least the entrance.
It was huge. It was like a Land of the Lost.
Yeah.
Even bigger than a Land of the Lost cave. It was very large. So, I had sort of in my head remembered people crawling around, but maybe I was mixing that memory up with some of the earthquake memories from when people were buried. So, she arrives at the gazebo. And Kelly is talking to Marcello, who's come in the front door, and Marcello's, she tells Marcello how she's the cause of Sophia's death, and then he says, but your mother's not dead, and then Sophia reveals herself, and Kelly's still a zombie, so she's kind of like half thinking this is a dream, right? And she does engage in the conversation with Sophia, and Sophia says, oh yeah, I was in a bad accident that day, and I didn't die, and I had amnesia, and Kelly doesn't really snap out of it, but she seems to take that in properly, and then suddenly realizes that Cece is about to marry Gina and says to Sophia, we've got to stop the wedding. So I think they're running over to the house, so I don't know if they're going to just barge on in together.
Yeah,
or
that's going to be really
Sophia
exciting.
will ring the doorbell, and Rosa will answer. Maybe Rosa will see Sophia first before Cece.
Yeah.
Don't know if running into Gina first would make a difference. I don't know if Gina would recognize her necessarily.
Yeah, it'll be pretty amazing. I also just wanted to note that for the last 2 or 3 episodes, I don't know if this was necessarily by design, but to me it has the effect that Kelly's been wearing this little sort of pink dress pinafore thing, and it kind of makes her look like a little girl, and she's been clutching this doll. And so the effect has been, I think, to really emphasize just how disturbed she's been for the last few.
Basically.
Yeah.
Lionel arrives home, and Augusta says that Sophia is loose somewhere in the house. And Lionel, immediately realizes why Sophia would come to this house, especially knowing that she's going to be stopping the wedding. So he sends Augusta off to a different part of the house so he can run down to the cellar. He goes into the tunnels himself with a flashlight and calls for Sophia. So I imagine he'll be popping up at the gazebo in the next episode.
Yeah, and we get a very clear idea from this episode of just how Lionel and Sophia were able to conduct this clandestine love affair for all these years without anyone knowing.
I imagine they would meet at the gazebo or go down into the tunnels.
In the middle of the tunnels, yeah.
There may be a secret room down there.
Yeah.
A little cot, like in the Demir Mansion. Days of Our Lives. Well, I'm excited about the tunnels, and we'll see if the wedding gets stopped in the next episode when we watch episode 162 of Santa Barbara. See you.
Bye.
Welcome back to our final episode of week 33.
Hello.
We watched episode 162 of Santa Barbara, which originally aired Friday, March 15th, 1985. Gina suggests to Cece that he loved chatting more than Mason, which we all sort of think based on what we've seen. But Cece says that's not true.
Mm-hmm.
Mason was his firstborn, and he always had a special love for him, and Mason just couldn't see it.
And actually, I really appreciated this little insight into Cece's mindset on this, because he says that actually of all his children, Mason is the most like him. And it makes me wonder if this is part of the reason why Cece has so ruthlessly tried to strip Mason of everything, which just seems so over the top. But it does occur to me that perhaps in Cece's mind, he started with nothing, and maybe he feels that Mason would benefit by pulling himself up from nothing too, and that maybe part of the problem is that Mason hasn't had a chance to do that.
Mm-hmm.
That's sort of my theory, but it was really nice to see Cece talk so movingly about his relationship with Mason.
I like to see Gina trying to maybe smooth things over with the family members.
Yeah, it's been kind of nice to see Mason bond a little bit with Sophia. So I don't know if Gina's really the person to smooth things out with the family, but it would be nice to see them become unified in some way.
So they've got about an hour and a half before the judge is meant to arrive, and so Cece gets a call that some oil well or oil rig negotiations need his help. So he says, I'm just going to pop down to the Capwell Hotel to help with these negotiations, but he'll be back by 4, he says. Mm-hmm. Sophia thinks the wedding is over, and so tells Kelly she's not going to bother revealing herself to Cece. She's just going to go back to the hotel.
Mm-hmm.
In the tunnels, of course, she runs into Lionel, and Lionel says these tunnels haven't been used since Sophia disappeared, and makes a lot of allusions to when they used to meet in the tunnels, I guess. It sounds like they might have met in the tunnels. He offers to distract Augusta so that Sophia can sneak back out of the Lockridge house, and he does that, but then Augusta hears something and opens the door to see Sophia running off the property, and definitely not in the direction of the Capwell house. So they realize she's not planning to stop the wedding. She's probably going to the hotel. So Lionel calls Mason to tell him that, and says that he won't get the puzzle box unless Sophia stops the wedding. Now Mason tries to claim he's already stopped the wedding twice, and that was all that he had to do to get the puzzle box. But Lionel isn't buying it, and Mason says, after hanging up, so that's what it feels like to bargain from not having a position of strength. I don't like it.
Yeah, I like that.
Make sure that never happens again.
Yeah.
So Augusta and Lionel argue about whether or not Lionel wants to start things up again with Sophia. And they end up having a food fight. And they end up making love on the living room floor.
And I have to admit, I actually had my eyes closed through a lot of that, because I just find food fights and having sex and, they were sort of smearing stuff all over each other. I just found that a bit gross, so I didn't really watch that. I felt that Peter's murder is easier. This probably says more about me than anything else.
The chocolate pudding killer. Well, they did worry that someone could have walked in. I mean, Minx or Brick or Lakin or Warren. I guess Warren's living in a barn, we were thinking.
Yeah, I think the last time we saw him, he was chatting up
Maggie,
and Elizabeth was still interested in him, and I think he was living in a barn. Yeah, I don't know what's happened to Warren, but he doesn't seem to be home. So
he and Danny and Jade have started a band. Mason finds Marcello and Sophia at the hotel and talks Sophia into revealing herself to Cece. she said, "Oh, I was hoping the kids would do that." And he said, "Well, all the kids are waiting for you, so why don't you just go ahead and do it?" Then they almost run smack into Cece, and then just, I guess, out of habit, they hide Sophia's face from him. I don't know why they don't want to tell him while he's at the hotel.
Mm-hmm.
But she agrees to stop the wedding and goes to the mansion. So Kelly and Ted are happy to see her, but not Eden. Gina sees her and runs out of the house. So I think it must have been Cece's bedroom that Gina and Cece have been in lately, because I don't see why else Sophia would walk into that bedroom and look at photos there. So.
Yeah, so Sophia at one point kind of convinces Kelly to go and rest and just make sure she's all right upstairs, and then I guess wanders into the master bedroom where she shared many years and many memories with Cece, and that's where Gina finds her.
Mm-hmm. So Gina says, "You're not going to stop my wedding," and runs out. And finds Cece at the Capwell Hotel and says, "Cece, let's get married right now. Let's just go to the courthouse and do it." And he's, "Well, my family's waiting." "Yeah, I don't care. We should just do it for ourselves. They don't want us to get married anyway." So Cece doesn't buy it. He wants to have the wedding properly at the house. So then Gina's got to try and get him to promise not to leave him when Sophia comes back to life. So says, "Oh, I just, I want to make sure you love me as much as Sophia." And he says, "Oh, I love you more than Sophia in a way, because I'm trying to think if she ever really loved me." So this sounds like a good positive thing for Gina.
Mm-hmm.
She figures she's going to try to hold him to that when he finds out Sophia's still alive. Now Hank has been skulking in the background, listening to this whole thing. And when Cece goes off, Hank warns Gina not to mess things up.
Sometimes I do wonder a bit about the Capwell Hotel security, because they've got Hank skulking around, as you say, and he just never looks like he's up to any good at all. And, if we recall a few weeks back, Peter picked up a hooker in the lobby and proceeded to strangle her. So, for a high-end hotel.
Mm-hmm. Well, but it always seems very busy in the lobby.
It does. So the business seems good.
Mm-hmm. I mean, they're renting a suite to Marcello to do hypnotism in. And
yeah.
Who knows what other businesses there might be. There might be in that hotel. Probably a spa of some kind nowadays.
Mm-hmm.
So when Mason arrives at the mansion, he agrees with Ted and Kelly that Sophia should reveal herself. So Eden says, "Well, you don't get a vote." The judge arrives, and then Cece arrives and starts to sign the papers. So Gina's just anxiously watching him sign everything.
So was he signing the papers for the marriage, or I think it was to declare
her dead,
wasn't it?
So the judge signed it first, then Cece signed it, which is weird, but maybe that's how it works. There should probably be witnesses who have to sign it too. But anyway, either way, as long as they don't file it, it's not legal, I don't think. And Sophia starts skulking and coming down the staircase, just as Cece is signing the papers.
So this made me think, because in between the time of us leaving Sophia and the Capwell children to kind of discuss and quarrel amongst themselves, and Cece coming back with Gina, it seemed to me like maybe they had reached a decision. I don't know if you thought that, but to let Cece sign the papers so Sophia wouldn't really be interrupting that at all if he so chose, but then also to reveal herself.
Yeah, because they kind of had poker faces on.
Yeah, they didn't look happy.
Mason, Kelly, Ted were all just standing there.
Yeah.
Was Mason still there?
No, Mason's
he must have left
not
because
there.
he wouldn't have been welcome, so he probably left. Yeah, by the time he was there when the judge arrived, I think, but by the time Cece arrived, Mason was gone. He's probably behind a pillar.
And I noticed Kelly is wearing a different outfit, so she's had her rest and she's come down and but she's kind of
So
wearing
fully
dark
planning
colors.
to take part in a wedding.
Yeah, yeah. I didn't think any of them were, maybe Eden, but the other two didn't seem super dressed for a wedding.
Which is interesting because Eden doesn't really want Gina
No.
in the family either.
But we did get some really interesting insight into the dynamics of the family, where we have Eden so opposed to and by the others, and I wonder if that's been a long-standing dynamic in the family, where they're very much team mom and she's very much team dad. It made me wonder where Channing would have fallen in that dynamic.
This is one of the few times I can remember all four of the kids being together.
Yeah, yeah. And I thought it was, sort of interesting that Eden tries to shut Mason up and shut him out by saying, well, you're not part of the family. And it's obvious that Tad and Kelly don't really accept that, and neither does Sophia.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So, be a lot of interesting conversations and fault lines, I think, coming out of this.
So I wonder if Cece will spot Sophia coming down the stairs, or Gina will spot her first.
Maybe, or they'll start the ceremony and Cece will look up and see her there, maybe. I don't know, but I'm sure she will make herself known to him, and it'll be interesting to see his reaction, if it'll be closer to, I'm sure he'll be shocked, but if it'll be closer to Eden's and being quite angry about the whole thing, or if it'll be closer to the other kids and being quite excited.
Yeah, a lot of times on Santa Barbara, things don't quite go the way you expect them to. So it's hard to guess what Cece's opinion will be.
And if we'll see Mason as well pop up at some point.
Pop up from behind a pillar with Rosa. One thing I really like about Linda Gibbon, who portrays Gina when she's worried as things are unraveling. I like the way she acts when Gina's freaking out, but she's underplaying it a little bit. But also, you can see she's really worried about things going off the rails. So.
I think it's in those moments, though, when we really see how resourceful Gina is as well. Because she does show her panicking. She does show that this is, very upsetting, but you also get a little bit of a sense of the wheels turning as well.
Yeah. As of the two Ginas, this is my favorite Gina. So this is one of the reasons. And that is it for this episode and this week. So we're going to watch episode 163 now, I think, and then probably podcast. Well, if it's still light out, we might do another one later. Otherwise, we'll do it in the morning. So we'll be back for week 34 after we watch episode 163 of Santa Barbara. See you then.
Bye-bye.
I think I'm being railroaded.